creative friends, Sonia here from Sustain My Craft Habit. Today we're taking the mystery out of making t-shirt yarn with this guide on which t-shirts are best to use for making yarn. A few years ago we created a post on how to make t-shirt yarn using the whole t-shirt with as little waste as possible. And later we shared a video on our YouTube channel which has since been viewed over 1 million times. So over the years we've received a lot of questions about what types of t-shirts are best used to make t-shirt yarn. So finally, we are putting this together to help answer all those questions. So before you cut into those tees, watch this video to learn which types of tees perform best for making t-shirt yarn. Okay, so for the first step, what you need to do is to figure out what type of knit was used on your t-shirt. So there are three main types of knits when it comes to t-shirts, and they include jersey, rib, and interlock. And they don't all work for making t-shirt yarn. So it's the first thing I would look at when I'm looking through t-shirts to use to make t-shirt yarn. So the first type is called a jersey knit. It's a majority, I would say, of the 100% cotton tees that you'd find. Ones that are usually either plain or printed with like something on the front are made with this jersey knit. And you can tell it's a jersey knit by looking at the front of the fabric and then reversing it and looking at the back side. So on the front, it's going to look really flat. There's going to be maybe some really faint vertical lines running through it, but nothing textured. It'll be smooth. And then on the reverse side, it's going to be different from the front side. And on the reverse side, if you look really closely, you'll see these loops that are going to be running, and that's the purl side of the jersey knit, and they'll be kind of running in the opposite direction. So that's the first clue, is that the front looks different from the back. And if that's the case, then it's most likely a jersey knit. So the other type of knit is called a rib knit, and this is an example of a rib knit. So if you look at it closely, if you look at the construction really closely, you'll see pretty noticeable vertical lines running all the way down the length of the fabric. And then when you turn it over, it's also going to look like you have these vertical lines that are running up and down the material. So in this case, this is a 1x1 rib, and you could have 2x2. You can sometimes have a 2x1, in which case it might look like there's two rows, two columns running down one side and then one on the reverse side. But regardless, you'll see a vertical pattern on one side as well as the back side. As an example, this would be a 2x2 rib pattern, and you do see these vertical lines running on both sides. So this type of a knit does not work well for making t-shirt yarn. So if you have it, I would put that aside and use it for maybe some other projects, but not for t-shirt yarn. So this type of a knit, this rib, usually you find in, I'd say, pajamas, because it's soft, it's comfortable, it doesn't really need to keep its shape, because if it's 100% cotton, it'll kind of just really, like, you see how stretchy it is, and if it loses its shape, it's okay, it's pajamas. But some other items or some other stuff that you might find this type of knit used in would be tank tops or undershirts, and often in kids' clothing too, you'll find this type of a knit. Not typically used for those cotton printed tees, just because of the amount of stretch. If you print on this, it'll crack and stretch out and not look very good. If you look at a t-shirt that is 1x1 rib and you really wanted to try and use it, this is actually what it looks like when I tried to turn it into t-shirt yarn. You could see it looks pretty ratty. It's really super stretchy, and then the edges look like they're unraveling or really rough, and it does not roll the way that a jersey knit will roll into itself, creating that really nice, like, smooth tubular yarn. So I would not suggest using anything that is 1x1 rib or any sort of rib to make yarn. And then the other type of knit is called an interlock knit, and you can tell it's an interlock. It's very smooth. on both sides, and actually both sides are also identical like the rib, but there's no noticeable pattern to it. It's very, very smooth on both sides. It tends to be pretty stretchy as well. It's used a lot in kids' clothes, especially baby clothes. You'll see a lot of interlock because it's soft and smooth and comfortable. You can also find it in sports jerseys for playing sports. I don't have too many pieces that have been knit with an interlock construction, so it was actually hard to find any in my house, but I did have this as an example. So you see how smooth it is on both sides. Okay, so then the other thing to look at is what is the fiber content of the t-shirt that you plan to use. So I know that using a jersey knit is the best option for a t-shirt yarn, but what happens if the label says it's 100% cotton versus another label that says a shirt is 95% cotton and 5% spandex? So I wanted to take a look at what happens when you make yarn with all of the different types of content that you can find for t-shirts. So this t-shirt I have here that I've cut into a strip is 100% cotton. So I have it here now, and I'm going to just pull on it to make my yarn. Just one strand of yarn. And you see how nicely it rolls. It's smooth, it's consistent. The edges roll really far in so that you don't actually see the cut edges on either side of the yarn. It's soft, it has a little bit of give, and it kind of bounces back. So now if I was to look at a shirt that has spandex in it, like this t-shirt, it's made with 95% cotton and 5% spandex. So I've cut my strip and I'm going to pull on it to make my yarn. And like this green one, it rolls in really nicely. It's also very smooth. It's a good weight, but you'll see that it's very stretchy compared to this one, which has a little bit of give and then it comes back. This one just keeps going. So although it looks great, it would actually be pretty hard to work with when you're knitting and crocheting a project. So I wouldn't recommend using this unless you're a pretty experienced knitter and I guess crochet, but depending on what your project is. But definitely keep that in mind, that it will affect your tension when you're making your projects. So if the t-shirt says that it's 95% cotton and 5% elastane, that's the same thing. Elastane, spandex, they're the same thing. Another content that you might come across is a label that says 50% cotton and 50% polyester. So this is a t-shirt that's in a jersey knit that I've cut into these strips, and now I'm gonna pull on it. So this is 50% cotton, 50% polyester, and you'll see that it does not affect the t-shirt yarn. It pretty much performs the same as if you were using 100% cotton jersey. So you have this 100% cotton jersey t-shirt, and then this one that is a blend of polyester and cotton. So a bit stiffer in this case, but it feels otherwise the same. It would work fine. So if you do have t-shirts that you come across, like this one's really nice and it doesn't have a side seam, it would work really well as t-shirt yarn. So often with these t-shirts that are a blend of cotton poly, it's typically t-shirts that you see that have this kind of heathered pattern. So the reason for that is because the color polyester and cotton absorb dye differently, and then that gives you the variation in color. Okay, and then the other type of content I wanted to cover was t-shirts that are made with viscose and cotton. So it's a blend of cotton and viscose or cotton and rayon. So viscose is just a type of rayon. It's a synthetic or a semi-synthetic material made from wood pulp, and it gives it, because it's like, it was actually originally used as a substitute for silk, it has a very silky feel and it drapes, so it kind of falls and has the weight of silk. And you'll be able to tell the difference between 100% cotton and a blend of cotton and viscose for sure. It's definitely smoother and silkier. So this is a t-shirt and I have it cut in strips, and I'm going to now make it into t-shirt yarn. Okay, so the look of it is okay at first glance, but it doesn't seem to really hold its shape as well as 100% cotton does. So if you look at it, it's almost like these edges are kind of unraveling and really loose compared to this, which is really being held kind of in place. Based on this, I wouldn't suggest using cotton that's blended with rayon or viscose to make your t-shirt yarn. The other thing is it's pretty stretchy, a lot stretchier than the 100% cotton, which would also make it hard to control. But mostly I just don't like that it doesn't seem to really hold its yarn shape. Okay, one of the other things to consider when finding t-shirts to use for t-shirt yarn is whether or not the t-shirt has a side seam. So this is an example of a shirt that has it, which means the pieces, the front and back pieces, were cut and sewn separately and then brought together. So you have this seam that runs all the way from the underarm down to the hem, and it's on both sides of the shirt. So when you have this, although it'll still work, you're gonna have a lot of join points in your yarn. So it's not ideal. It'll kind of break up your piece, and after using so many, it might not look the nicest. So definitely avoid using them if you can, and then stick to shirts that don't have a side seam, like this t-shirt I have here. So if you see, it's the same. There's a sleeve here, and then there's no seam at all running down the length of it, which is also an indicator that the shirt is 100% cotton jersey knit, which works best for making t-shirt yarn. So these tees, they were knitted on a circular knitting machine as opposed to cut and sew like something like this. So they were sewn around, making them completely seamless except for the sleeves. Okay, so something else to keep in mind is that if you want to adjust the thickness of your yarn, depending on what project you're working on, you can do that by adjusting the width of the strips that you cut from your t-shirt. So we'll just go through that here. So I have a t-shirt, I've cut off the hem, and just to show you the difference, I'm going to mark, this is not the straightest edge, so I'm going to first make sure I cut a straight edge. Okay, so that's my first edge that I'm going to cut so it's nice and clean. And then I'm going to mark from that first line, I'm going to mark another line that 1/2 inch away. So then that's 1/2 inch thick here. And then I'm going to do another one that's 1 inch wide, which is typically how wide I cut when I'm making my own t-shirt yarn. And then, so I have a 1/2 inch, 1 inch, then I'm going to do 1.5 inches. And now I'll do another one that's 2 inches, just to see what happens with the yarn when you cut wider strips. Okay, so now I'm going to cut. Okay, so my pieces are cut. So now I am going to create my yarn, and I do that by pulling on the strand like this so that the edges curl inward. I'll do that for the whole length. So this is the narrowest strip that I cut at 1/2 inch. So now this is, the next one I'm going to do is this 1 inch wide. So you can already see that this strand is wider or thicker than this strand. So now I'm going to do the 1.5 inch. And next is the 2 inch. Okay, so there you have it. It might be a little bit hard to show because there's these 2 rows for each strand, but you can see that it does make a difference in the thickness of the yarn when you're cutting, to make sure that you keep that in mind when you're cutting your strips. So this is pretty thin and, you know, would be ideal for certain knitting projects. It's kind of more like a fingering yarn, I would say. And then this is kind of more of a standard yarn thickness. Once you get into these ones, they're a bit more chunky, especially this one that was cut at 2 inches wide. It's nice. It would actually make your projects go much quicker, maybe for like a rag rug or something like that. This 2-inch wide strip would work out really well. I don't know that I would go any wider. I'd probably say no, although in this particular t-shirt it does roll really nicely. I just think it will get to be too flat looking, like especially once they start to kind of unroll themselves in certain spots when you're knitting them into or crocheting them into your work. So I think 2 inches would be the widest that I would recommend. This video combined with our other t-shirt yarn making video, you have all the info you need to get started. Some projects we've made with our own yarn include this finger crochet rag rug, this adorable crochet basket with handles, some knitted candle cozies, and this sweet crochet heart garland. Let us know if you have any questions in the comments below and tell us what projects will you make with your yarn. Please give the video a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks so much for watching.